All right, hello and welcome to another episode of Sacktown Talks. Today we have a great show for you. We have Dan Dunmoyer joining us from the California Building Industry Association. Dan, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us. How's it going?
Going well, and thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Dan, for our listeners, I was wondering if you could give us a little background on yourself and kind of your association.
You bet. So, native Californian, born in the great city of Hollywood, but moved to the small town of Hemet, which is over the mountain from Palm Springs. If you get lost on your way to Palm Springs,
Right.
you'll find your way there. Grew up down south, went to school at USC, and popped up to Sacramento for a one-year assembly fellowship when Willie Brown was speaker, and fell in love with the political process and never left. So been involved in the public and private sector, legislature, governor's office, now California Building Industry Association, representing the home builders of California, both those who develop the land and those who build about 85% of both the multifamily and single family homes in California.
Wow, interesting. Thanks for the background. Kind of getting, I guess, right into housing, and kind of it's been a hot topic these last few years. There's, I guess, kind of a thought that there's a shortage of housing out there. How are you and your industry kind of working on housing with the legislature?
That's a really great point. And we do believe there's a shortage. And if you don't believe us, you just need to watch the market. So California housing prices continue to go up. The average price of a house in California now is over $700,000. That's a statewide average.
Wow.
We have parts of the state, Inland Empire, it's as low as 250 to 300,000 for a very small housing unit. And in Palo Alto, the average home price is 2.6 million. So you have this kind of range in California. We know just because of how many people want a tremendous demand for it. It's the price that we're forced to sell it at that's creating the shortage and the difficulty for people to buy our product. But there's tremendous demand, tremendous need, and a real desire for people to buy our homeowners product.
Yeah, kind of in your opinion, I know interest rates are dropping. They're saying that's kind of leading to, prices increasing. But normally it's just kind of simple supply and demand. And I guess right now there's more demand for housing than there is a supply. Kind of, what other factors do you believe are leading to, I guess, housing being so expensive in this state?
Well, it's interesting to see this because a lot of people will ask the question, so why are you charging so much? Are you just making these obscene profits? I don't understand, why does it cost on average $700,000 to buy a home in this state? And all I say is, take a trip across the border. And I don't mean Mexico, I mean Arizona, Nevada, and Oregon. And you can buy our exact same product from the exact same home builder for, in some cases, a third the price. So why are we selling it for $700,000 in California and $275,000 in Reno or Phoenix or even up in Salem, Oregon? It's because California has chosen to put a tremendous amount of obligation on the home builder, obligation to pay for city government, not just the government they need for the home, but the entire government, to pay for the pension systems, to pay for the entire water reformation system of an entire city, not just the project, but the entire city, because the fees and requirements placed on home builders are hidden. It's a hidden tax. And so if you cross the border of Arizona, it costs us $10,000 in fees. If you go to Livermore, if you go to anywhere in the Bay Area and big parts of Southern California, it costs as little as $80,000 a home in fees and as high as almost $200,000 a home in fees. So that fee dependency or fee addiction in California is creating this impossibility of delivering a home price that most Californians can afford to buy if they want to.
Yeah, kind of, to rewind the clock back here a little bit to the days of redevelopment. I guess, how did the loss of these redevelopment fees for cities kind of change how homes were built?
Well, it's pretty clear to see that it was a bad thing for the state of California. The redevelopment agencies were able to use that tax increment in a way that effectively brought in both market rate housing and affordable housing. And so right now we're hurting in both spaces. It kind of structured government, even more importantly, to focus on creating that housing need and meeting that housing need, because if they didn't meet it, they lost their dollars. So one of the challenges, if a city doesn't have any resources and building homes cost more, they're just not going to have any incentive to build. And the redevelopment agency dollars gave them the incentive as well as the resources to accomplish that. So we are seeing, as we've seen for the last 5 or 6 years, this lack of housing, this tremendous demand of housing, and the inability for local governments to meet the financial need to actually achieve that housing. So it's been a profound change, and we need all the above kind of housing, the affordable, the market rate, even free housing for people who are in charity needs. But we need to build more in all those categories, and losing redevelopment agencies really hurt the ability for local governments to do that.
The legislature's been really busy, I guess, on this housing topic the past 2 years. You had SB 50, a slew of other bills kind of out there, you know, each having kind of, mixed results and success. Kind of what kind of answers, are you and your industry looking at to kind of help solve this housing issue? And, what more needs to be done to kind of help, bridge the gap here?
Yeah, it really is the focal point of where things are at. And great question. So the great news is what you said. I mean, there is a focus on housing. The governor ran on 3.5 million new housing units. Senator Atkins this year, even with COVID, shutting down the legislature in its normal form and fashion, committed on her last speech before they turned out the lights for a few months that housing would still remain a priority. And in the assembly, the chairman of the Assembly Housing Committee, David Chu, put together 5 or 6 measures to help push the agenda. Finally, the governor's State of the State address, again pre-COVID, but this year, just 9 short months ago, his entire address was on homelessness and housing. The first time in modern history, a governor only chose one subject matter, housing, for his State of the Union address. So the good news is there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of focus. The challenge we're seeing, though, is the ability to get a great idea across the finish line to the governor is where the challenge has been. And it's been difficult to take the original bill in its original form, which could make it easier and less costly for us to build. By the time it goes through the sausage making process, well, one, almost all of them this year didn't even get across the finish line to the governor. And the few that did had a minimal impact. So there is an understanding of the need, but there really isn't a true comprehension of the necessary steps that have to be taken to actually get this done. And so we're still pushing for more housing reform.
There's been a lot of talk about, I guess, multifamily units, and that seems kind of untenable to a lot of communities. Because they feel that maybe that's going to bring their property values lower. Kind of what are you seeing out there in the market with demand towards multi-housing, kind of duplexes, triplexes, apartment complexes, and such?
It's a really robust market. So 85, 90% of our housing was single family. Not this past year, but the 2 years before. So 2017, 2018 and 19, we built as many multifamily housing units as single family, the first time in California history. So there's a tremendous demand for it. There's a couple reasons why there's demand. That includes things like condominiums, and those cost less. So it's the more affordable price point. The second part is, are those duplexes and triplexes? And that, again, you have shared walls and shared sewer systems and shared overhead costs, and that keeps the cost down. So if you look at, take a community like Sacramento, you'll see beautiful single family detached homes, and on the corners, the edges, you'll see duplexes. And you only see it if you really look hard, because it's done so well, it just looks like a big home.
Right.
And if you look in midtown in Sacramento, you'll see these things look like mansions, and they're fourplexes, because they don't put all the doors visibly from the street. You only put one door. And all of a sudden somebody thinks you're living in a mansion when you're living in a fourplex. So communities can accept multifamily. They don't have to be this, it doesn't have to draw the value down. Matter of fact, if you do it right, it pulls the value up, or at least maintains it. But there's a lot of outcry and a lot of people who are concerned and scared and push back on these. But we're building it because people want it, and it's a price point people can afford.
A lot in California has talked about how, I guess, hard it is to do, business here, cost of doing business. Another issue is kind of union labor. Can you kind of talk about kind of union labor and how that's being used in kind of building houses in California, and if there's any sort of resolution that could help kind of, build more homes and make a partnership with union labor?
Great question. That is a $1 billion question. So a couple of things on that front. So labor, what we call building trade labor, so the formal unionized labor builds most of the commercial construction in California. Not all,
Right.
but most of it. But to your question, the residential side, since the mid 70s, the amount of actual organized labor that builds residential has almost trickled down to single digits. It's done that for two reasons. One, you get paid a lot more when you build, a big building. Commercial is complicated, and you can charge more as the laborer. The other component too is just the commitment at all levels, both legally defined organized labor and just general, small letter labor. There's not as many of our children who are being encouraged to go into a career of building, construction, framing. So you have kind of two dynamics here. One is just all kids should go to college was said 10 years ago. Now we're realizing maybe that's not the case, since we have multi-trillion dollars in debt in college and people don't graduate. But in this window of time, there's fewer people who are skilled to do this, and then itself labor is just adds challenge and cost. The specific challenge that we face in the legislature is labor wants to encourage and force the legislature to use organized labor, and that adds cost. The labor says it adds 8 or 10% of cost. For us, it adds about $85,000 per home
Wow.
in average increased labor costs. Now, if you're building a $4 million structure in San Francisco, not a big deal. If you're building a $275,000 home in Fresno, you can't build it.
Right.
So that's the challenge. It depends on how it's used. We'd love to find a path to reconciliation there. But right now, labor's approach is it's our way or the highway. In this case, we're not building. So that's the challenge. And they have shut down all the legislative ideas this year. Almost everyone, including the pro Tems bill, Tony Atkinson bill, Senate Bill 1120, and labor resisted that every step of the way, and they killed numerous bills that would make it easier and faster and more affordable to build housing, because it wasn't guaranteed usage of skilled and trained, formal building trade labor. And for us, it should be both and. We should use building trades, but we should also be able to use competitive rate labor. And right now, the formal unionized labor is opposed to that, and they've effectively stopped real reform.
Interesting. To harken back, I guess, to 2006, kind of last time we saw kind of a big real estate boom. There was talk, I guess, about maybe an oversupply of homes being built, which led to kind of a decline. Now that we're kind of in this kind of, again, this weird kind of economic times, I guess, do you see any issues with housing right now where you could see a decline in kind of the homes and prices of homes, or do you think that, because of the supply and demand issues are, still present, that, housing will continue to kind of be robust and kind of still increase in value?
Yeah, another great question. So the challenge here is some people have said this isn't going to sustain itself, and they said that in the year 2000. So because the supply, to your supply demand question first, because the supply is so limited, I do believe the price of housing will continue to stay at a high level, and the access to housing will be challenging for many families. When you look at, what point does the cost of living in California truly drive people out in a truly profound way? I mean, we're first time since our state's been formed, we are actually losing, an electoral college vote. So obviously people are starting to vote with their feet and moving to pick the states. Texas is number one, but it's also Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Oregon, Washington, Idaho. If that truly takes hold, you could see people start to see a decline in housing price. People are still having babies. That's going to create this dynamic of demand. Even if people aren't moving into the state, we're still having children, and that is creating this profound need for housing. So right now and for the foreseeable future, as in years, 3 to 5 years, I still think the demand will outstrip the supply and prices will continue to grow. The one thing you might see is with COVID and people commuting and telecommuting being so much more acceptable, and just this whole interview here being on Zoom kind of speaks to all of that. You'll see people buying different parts of the state will have greater demand, like Sacramento will outstrip maybe San Francisco, because you can buy a mansion in Sacramento for the price of a simple house in San Francisco. So you might see some geographic challenges, but across the state, there's still going to be a demand for housing, a strong demand.
Yeah, that kind of leads me to my next question. Kind of where are the hot spots where homes are being built these days? I know, 15, 20 years ago, it was kind of urban sprawl, and then there's this kind of return to the city and more infill projects. Kind of what are you seeing? What areas are being built up now and kind of that you'll see being built up for the next 5 years?
So pre-COVID, you nailed it. That was really the focal point, both of the political leadership of the state wanting us to do urban infill, transit-oriented districts. People wanted to build up and not out. But two things that come to play here. One is price. A lot of people would love to have a home in a transit-oriented district with a view of the ocean. That is a beautiful place to live if they only had $2.5 million. And when you look at the number of people in California who can afford a $2.5 million home, it's a really small single-digit percentage. So then, what happens is people, as we say, people drive until they can afford to buy. They don't intentionally want to have a 2-hour commute from Stockton into San Francisco or from Sacramento into San Francisco, but they can't afford to live in San Francisco. So they drive and drive until they can find the price point, whether it's Merced, whether it's Fresno. People have these 5-hour a day commutes back and forth in total commute time because they drive until they can afford. So the push to buy in the suburbs, there is the advantage under COVID to have a nice backyard and let your kids go crazy in your own backyard. But the challenge is that's also what people can afford. So although there's, with COVID, there's less interest in our infill products and there's greater interest in our suburb products, but there's always been greater interest in our suburb products because of price. It's half or a third the price of a nice penthouse in an infill in a big city next to transit. And that's going to continue to drive people out of downtown until that issue is addressed.
Interesting. COVID-19 has kind of affected everyone a little bit differently, different industries and such. But it kind of seems like construction is one of those industries that's been able to kind of continue, maybe a bit unfazed. Can you kind of describe how COVID-19 has affected, I guess, housing starts and whether, you guys have been delayed or slowed down at all, or is it just kind of business as usual?
So you look at the COVID dynamic when Governor Newsom came out on March 4th and said, hey, here's going to be how we shut down and shelter in place. His first official executive order did not include residential construction or any construction for that matter as an essential component of the economy. That was at 6 p.m. By 10 p.m., thanks to his willingness to listen to us and explain why we thought it was essential to sheltering in place to build homes, we were allowed to continue. And the reason why we made the case is because we had thousands of homes that were within a week of being constructed, that people had already given up their rental lease and were ready to move in. In some cases, they already owned the home. They just had to do the final inspection. And if the governor shut them down at midnight that day, you'd have thousands of families stuck on the street who could afford to buy a home but couldn't move into it because of this restriction. So governor listened to us very, he watched us closely, but we were able to stay open statewide. A month into it, the Bay Area counties, 7 of them, when the COVID spike occurred in their regions, shut down everything, including construction, except for a limited group of affordable housing. We worked with them and showed them that your chances of catching COVID are 5 times greater if you stay at home than if you work at a construction job site. I'll say that again. Your chances of catching COVID are 5 times greater staying at home and doing your normal home activities, which include shopping and other things, than it is working on a job site. And that's because when you walk on a job site before COVID, you'd see people with these things called PPE, which we now know what it is, but a mask.
Right.
You can't put an insulation without a mask. You can't paint without a mask. You can't cut piping without a mask. So a lot of the things you need, and then distancing. When you build a home, people don't stand 2 feet next to each other. They're all over the roof. They're outside. They're laying cement 20 feet apart. They're carrying 2x4s that are 12 feet long. They're automatically socially distancing. All that to say, we were able to maintain our economic activity, employ hundreds of thousands of people, continue to build homes, get more families sheltering in place than before COVID, and help the economy come back to some degree. It's still hurting, but we have kept at least 850,000 people employed, which most of those are attached to families, through the COVID crisis, give people a place to shelter in place and move forward. So it's both us building, labor being employed, and us being able to actually meet the needs of this need to shelter. So we have been part of the solution of this COVID crisis.
Amazing. I guess to kind of talk about another hot topic, wildfires. We've been ravaged by wildfires the last couple of years. We've had a lot of communities burned. And with that comes rebuilding homes, increase, timber costs, increased demand for labor. Something you touched on before is, how hard is it to find and maintain this labor? And I guess, is there enough of these specific tradesmen to kind of sustain, the governor's goals in building all these housing units?
It's super hard to find labor of all types, whether it's unionized labor or free market labor. And that occurred before the fires. With the fires, it just gets more challenging. The challenge of building in a fire area is you tend to build one home at a time. So it's super hard to attract labor, because if I come to you, you're a skilled plumber, and I come to you saying, hey, I want you to help me build this home in Paradise. You're like, well, I'm over here in Santa Rosa where they're building 400 homes. I have 400 jobs in a row. So why would I go for one when I can have a whole year of housing for myself and my
Right.
crew? So just that component makes it super hard in the fires, because most communities rebuild one home at a time post fire, because it's one insurance company, it's one family, it's different coverages, different issues. So it makes it complicated just in and of itself. But in the labor component, all the harder to get somebody to commute an hour and a half from, Stockton into Paradise to rebuild one home. Where do they live? They live in their truck in the back of it. They have a camper shell. It's just much more difficult than driving home and working a job site for an entire year. The other piece of this from a labor side is just the demand for housing and the lack of encouraging our children to go into this industry, combined with the fires, combined with the demand. All that just makes labor that much more difficult to find, that much more expensive and priced out to bring together to the job site, and just makes the challenge of home building all the more complicated. So we view the lack of labor as one of the key challenges to meeting our goals and just achieving affordability.
You touched upon this earlier in the podcast that Governor Newsom had, a goal of building, X million homes, in his first couple of years. I guess what's the progress report? How many homes have been built, and kind of what percentage is he at to reaching his goal?
So we applaud the governor for his commitment to achieving more housing units. But to your question of the numbers, unfortunately, since Governor Newsom has stepped in, the numbers have gone down. So last year of Governor Brown, we pulled 120,000 building permits. That's both single family and multifamily. Since Governor Newsom has taken over, last year we pulled 110,000, so 10,000 less. This year, unless something changes in the last quarter, which starts in a few weeks, we're going to actually pull probably 4,000 or 5,000 less than last year, so 104 to 106,000 permits. So the trend is in the wrong direction, and the demand is going in the opposite, it's higher and higher. So you have fewer housing units built, higher and higher demand. Again, supply and demand, the price goes up just because of that. So we are, we are working with the governor. He's maintained a robust conversation with us on the production side of things. But the reality of the fact is our numbers are down.
I guess kind of what's leading to these numbers being down? Is it environmental issues? Is it a lack of shovel ready projects? Kind of what's kind of leading to these lack of permits being pulled?
So the answer is yes to your questions. It is lack of shovel ready. It's environmental regulations. It's additional costs and fees. So if people were all gazillionaires, we would actually be able to build a lot more homes, because we could build very expensive homes, expensive to build, not really nice homes, as in compared to other states or other regions of the world. But you get to a point where at $200,000 a home, let's go to a state like Texas or Arizona, where you can actually still buy that level of home. You'll have tens of millions of people who can afford that. And you go to 300,000, you'll have 10 million. And you go to 400,000, you'll have 800,000. You get up to 7, 8, 900,000, which is the average price. And those percentages, kind of that curve just starts to go down, getting closer and flatter in the line. So as the cost to build goes up, as the fees go up, as the cost of labor goes up, the cost of materials, lumber right now is going up $16,000 to $20,000 per home in higher price. And then you get to the issue of the environmental side. We have more regulations in California from an environmental perspective to build housing than anywhere else in the world. I'll say that again, not anywhere else in the United States, anywhere else in the world. Japan tries to rival us, but we pass them up now. And so we passed the Japanese because it will take me maybe 10 or 12 months for one of our home builders to build a home in the state of Arizona or Nevada. And that would be considered a long time. In California, to take 20 to 25 years from start to finish is considered average. So you add all these additional costs and all these additional complexities, and delay is money. So it's just a simple thing. If I say, hey, I want you to invest in me, and in 25 years you may get a return in your investment, you're like, well, you better be paying me a lot of money for that kind of risk. And it's like, no, I'll pay you 8% pre-tax, and you're like, I'm not interested. So that's our challenge: is go to an investor and say, give me 20 years of your time, 20 years of your money, and pay me, only charge me 8%. They're like, I can go to Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Maryland, Washington. I can get money back from a housing project in 12 months. And I can actually get more than 8%. I can get 12 or so. That's where we're seeing that just continues to compound it. So, when you add in all these requirements of delay and complexity and cost, that's why it's just so difficult and so costly to build in this great state of California, where everybody wants to live, but the price to live here is so high.
Right. It seems kind of, talking this through is that, the solutions are there, the problems are evident, but kind of, why aren't things being fixed? And that kind of leads me to kind of 2021, I guess. Kind of what is your association looking to achieve in 2021? And, I guess, how politically feasible do you think it's going to be?
Yeah, so that is where we are. We are focused to move forward, and we have put together this effort called Housing Creators and Housing Killers. This is kind of a legislative moniker,
Right.
because the legislature keeps coming to us saying, we want to build
Job
more
killer
housing. You
list.
should,
Yeah.
you should make it easy for us to know if this is a good bill or a bad bill. And so we have created this communication tool that just says, here are the list of bills, like the Atkins bill, the Caballero bill, the bill by Garcia this year that makes it so we have more time to build under COVID. These are housing creators. And then there's bills out there that add cost. Even though we are already paying more than anybody else in the country, there's bills like Colorado that add cost. If we use environmental incentives, they want us to pay more. Well, okay, it just means we charge more. So you think they want to incentivize us to use the best energy efficient equipment and not be effectively double taxed for it through higher wages for labor. So we've created this because we want to make it easy on legislators who look at 5,000 bills, like, hey, what are the good housing bills? So we are going to come back next year with the housing creator list. We'll educate people some of their ideas, although well-intentioned or actually not well-intended, are bad for housing and are housing killers. But we know there's still interest in doing it. We know the governor's office continues to express a desire to find ways to increase production. So we want to find that path. But above all, it takes courage, because in order to change the way we build housing in California, local governments will need to be more equitable in their fees. Environmentalists will need to be more balanced in their approaches to delivering environmental protection, but still building housing. And labor will have to say, hey, we can't pay 3 or 4 times more per home for labor and make the price affordable for the middle class, and especially those trying to enter the middle class. So it's going to take courage from the politicians. And it can be done. Again, it's done in Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Texas. Shoot, it's done in Maryland and Connecticut, which are all Democrat states. This isn't a partisan issue. Washington's all Democrat now. We can build a home in Seattle 10 times faster than we can in San Francisco. 2 great cities, very similar cities, same demographic makeup, same Democrat makeup. One says build here, one says don't build here. So it's a matter of political courage and focus. It's not a matter of complex policies. We figured it out. We just haven't figured it out in California.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to do. And we think we've found a path there, and it just takes the courage to get to yes.
Yeah. The November elections are coming up, and there's a slew of propositions. Is your association taking any positions on some of these upcoming propositions?
Yeah, we have. We're focused on a couple of them. One of them is the rent control measure. We did negotiate with Governor Newsom an agreed upon rent control measure with Mr. Chu, AB 1482, and that was hard because we don't believe in rent control, but we came to a neutral position on that. And so there is a rent control measure, Prop 21, which we're opposed, which would add even another layer of rent control on top of the most restrictive in the nation, which we have already. So we're opposed to that because we have seen multifamily construction since rent control go down by almost 20%. So the market investors won't invest if they can't get a basic return. And so we are opposed to rent control. And then Prop 15, which is known as the split roll measure, we're opposed to that as well because it will increase the cost of commercial property. And although we don't build, we're home builders, most cities require us now to get through the process of approval. We call it the entitlement process. They want us to include a grocery store and some restaurants and some
Right.
boutique stores. They call it mixed use. We want commercial and residential combined. So you go to investors and say, hey, we'd like you to invest as we build the homes. And they're like, well, you got this higher taxes. It doesn't pencil out for us. Or the only thing that pencils out is if you build really nice homes, we'll put in a really high-end store. We'll put in a Whole Foods instead of a Walmart. Well, it costs more, and it means you have to build higher priced housing. So those are very tightly linked. And so Prop 15 and Prop 21 to us are not good for housing, and they're not good for the price of housing. So we're opposed to both of those.
Yeah. This is, I guess, something you've touched on a couple of times of, these price points, these squeeze points kind of, I see it here in Sacramento. It seems like, as you were saying, right around that $800,000 mark, there's a precipitous fall off on, I guess, how quickly housing sells. And so kind of, I guess, what are you seeing statewide? Like, where is those bottlenecks, for housing and kind of affordability and kind of where that demand sits?
What we see, there's an interesting statistic that the National Association of Home Builders has provided us. So for every $1,000 in incremental cost, 9,800 family units, can no longer afford to buy a housing product. So the difference between a $300,000 home and a $301,000 home in California will exclude 9,800 families. So you keep on adding that up. So to your point of a $700,000 or $800,000 price point, you just continue to exclude more and more families who can't afford to buy a piece of the American dream. And so right now, we are seeing, generally speaking, a good price point in California for most families being able to afford it is in the $350,000 to $400,000 range. But the average in the state right now is $700,000. Average in the Bay Area is over $1 million. You have to go out to Fresno and Stockton and places like Merced or Riverside or Norco or Corona or Temecula or Hemet, or you go out, Calexico. So you get these areas and everyone's like, why do you guys keep building in the suburbs? Like, don't you believe in climate change? And you're like, well, when you put so many fees on homes and so many costs on homes, so many regulations on home, people will drive until they can afford.
Right.
And do I really want a 5-hour commute, never see my children or my spouse? Or do I want to just go down the street to my school and then walk to my work? Well, everybody would prefer that. It's just not everybody's a millionaire. As a matter of fact, not everybody's a multi-millionaire. So that's our challenge. And so we do see that price challenge when you add in a little more regulation. Let's put in other requirements. Let's put in this thing called vehicle miles traveled, or let's enhance our water purification requirements on the job site. It all sounds great until you realize it all adds cost.
Right.
So we are seeing that once you get past 425, 450, you get a really small percentage. When you get to the average 700, it's just a hand. Now that's why you get this really reduced number of people who are buying and owning homes in California compared to the rest of the country.
Interesting. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us. Definitely interesting topic, and it's going to be something spoken about a lot next year. And we look forward to having you on again later next year to give us an update on how things are going.
Thank you, and thanks for seeking our viewpoint. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Dan. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye. Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of Sacktown Talks. Make sure you like and subscribe on your YouTube page, hit that notification bell, or rate and review wherever you listen to the podcast. Thanks to producers Phil and Vernon, and we'll be back to you on Wednesday. Thank you.
Some are called dreamers.